And welcome to the National Building Museum. My name is Scott Kratz. I'm the Vice President for Education here at the museum. And tonight's program is entitled Wanted Power, Location Anywhere But Here, which is the 11th in our ongoing series called For the Greener Good, Conversations That Can Change the World. The goal of this series is to bring together the world's leading experts from different disciplines to discuss sustainability and the built environment. This evening's program will examine the nation's growing appetite for energy. Much talk has been made about the need for green energy in the United States. The problem is that many of the best locations for wind turbines or a solar array field are far from the cities that consume that energy. And very few people want a nuclear power plant, transmission line, or even a wind farm in their backyard. Here at home, there has been a huge fight between residents of Northern Virginia and a local power company over the proposed construction of transmission lines to feed Washington's continued need for power. In the conversation that follows, we'll talk about our nation's outdated energy infrastructure, issues of planning, state and federal use of eminent domain, and energy efficiency as buildings consume up to 40% of the energy produced domestically. We've assembled an impressive panel representing a range of viewpoints and experiences, and I look forward to an interesting discussion. Given the themes of the series, I would encourage everyone to visit our brand new exhibition, Green Community, located up in the second floor, that just opened up last month. Green Community explores the past, present, and future of sustainable towns and cities from across the globe. The show is open through October 2009. And programs such as tonight have been designed to incorporate your questions and thoughts. They're meant to be conversational in format. We will break periodically during the program to take questions from the audience. In an effort to get in as many questions as possible, questions and responses as possible, I'd ask you to be brief with your question and ensure they are on the tonight's subject matter. We could not do these programs without our funder for this series, and the For the Greener Good series is presented by the museum's sustainability partner, the Home Depot Foundation, and we would like to thank them for their generous support of this innovative lecture series. If you like what you hear and experience tonight, I'd invite you to come back in just next week, actually, for our next program in the series. On December 4th, we'll host our next panel, coyly titled Divorce Your Car, that will explore how we can create walkable neighborhoods along transit corridors. The panel will include Robin Chase, the founder of Zipcar, Bert Gregory, the president and CEO of Methuen Architects and Designers and Planners, who's also the co-chair of USGBC's Lead for Neighborhood Development, Shelley Paticha, the president and CEO of Reconnecting America, and the moderator for the program will be Juliet Eilprin, the environmental reporter for the Washington Post. Before we begin, can I get an idea of who's in the audience? It will help all of the panelists who are up here, give them an idea of who they're speaking to. For architects in the audience, can you raise your hand? Great. Planners? Wonderful. Landscape architects? Great. Any engineers? Engineer. Journalists? Great. Students? That's great. Federal or state employees? Wonderful. And lastly, lawyers? Any lawyers in the audience? I ask who did I forget, and everyone always says a lawyer, so I decided to make sure I put it in the list. Great. With that, I'd like to introduce tonight's moderator, who will in turn introduce our distinguished panelists. Matt Wald is a journalist for the New York Times, where he's been writing about energy since 1979. His most recent articles in the paper have been on the selection of a new energy secretary for the incoming administration, a report on a new power grid for alternative energy, I'm sure will be germane to tonight's conversation, and a possible renaissance for nuclear power. He last moderated a program about nuclear energy at the museum in October of 2007. Please welcome Matt Wald.
Thank you very much, Scott. And I guess I could ask for another show of hands. Who here uses energy? Last week I was in Columbus, Ohio, visiting American Electric Power, one of the largest coal burners and power companies in the country. And they were talking about a 760 kilovolt power line, a monster power line, 14-story high, towers marching from here to there. They wanted to build 90 miles. It took them 30 months to build it. It had taken 14 years to get the approval to build it. Now they want to build 22,000 miles of similar line around the country, but calculating how long it would take to get the approval to do that at the rate of 90 miles every 14 years, Star Trek will have come and gone before it's finished. We have a problem in this country, which is we have a dichotomy between environmentalism and environmentalism. We use electricity because it's clean and easy. Oftentimes it replaces, but nobody likes, as Scott just said, to live near where it is generated or transmitted. Hence we have environmental objections to environmental projects. And we're here to talk about that tonight. I hope we are the world's leading panel. I'm not sure, but we do have a very good panel. Tyson Slocum is at Public Citizen, which was founded by Ralph Nader. Tyson joined the energy program in 2000 and now is its director, promoting stronger regulation of energy markets, examining the impact of mergers and lax regulation over electricity, petroleum, and natural gas, monitoring federal energy legislation. 3 years ago, Public Citizen sued to try to overturn the restructuring of the electric markets, the change that's widely referred to as deregulation by the FERC. Personally, I love this idea. I'd like to see Ralph Nader standing up for good old conservative values. Tyson researches the influence of corporate and special interests on our political system. He's the author of numerous reports on this subject. Jimmy Voss, seated in the center, is a special consultant to the Mayor of Port Gibson, Mississippi. Port Gibson is a town that's saying, yes, please, in my backyard. It wants a new nuclear reactor. Jimmy grew up in Port Gibson, spent most of his career in Illinois. He's been a financial executive within the government and a private consultant, getting down to the nuts and bolts of things like how to write grant proposals, how government really works. Port Gibson is 25 miles down the river from Vicksburg. One of the few bright spots in its economy is the Grand Gulf 1 nuclear reactor. Now there's a plan for a second reactor. It would be built by craftspeople from far away, and there'd be some hundreds of permanent jobs. When I was down there in 2005, there was talk of a furniture company that was going to add a second shift, and that was going to be 40 jobs versus about 2,000 for building the reactor. The reactor is still a work in progress. Andrew Karsner was the Assistant Secretary of Energy for Conservation and Renewables from early 2000 until earlier this year, when he decided to go home. Luckily for us, his home is Alexandria, Virginia, so he's still here. Before DOE, he was the managing director of EnerCorp, a company that develops renewable energy projects around the world. He also has experience in heavy fuel oil, distillates, natural gas, coal, wood, waste, biomass, wind energy, and distributed generation based on renewable technologies. And Andy, earlier this week, became the U.S. Green Building Council Man of the Year. So I'm going to start this off. We're going to have lots of time for audience questions, but I'm going to start this off with a question, which is, energy development is often something everybody needs but nobody wants. It's often not particularly attractive in the spot where it is, but it makes the whole world work better, it makes the whole country work better. So maybe we'll start down at the end with Andy and work back this way, which is, we have a system of government that's fragmented, that has ways to stop things at many levels, and has difficulty making things work in a centralized way. We like it that way. We like paralyzed government sometimes. Is this working for us in energy, and what ought we to do to solve our energy problems in an atmosphere where it's hard to build anything?
Well, sometimes it works in energy, but not for all forms, and not necessarily in the forms and the outcomes that we want it to work for. That's certainly the case when you begin talking about what are the fundamental building blocks and the technologies that you seek to proliferate in a new energy economy. And they are held at a notable disadvantage when you talk about siting and grid access and permitting, particularly in a time frame or at a scale that you would like to see them. And so you have a couple problems at play. One, trying to get to massive turnover of the capital stock, which is really what you're talking about, how to replace old iron with new iron or resins or polysilicon or whatever it is you're deploying, or atoms, and trying to address the intrinsic characteristics of the new capital stock and the new generating facilities and the new transmitting facilities. That's an embedded dilemma. And then you have the dilemma that's more common that you're talking to, which is, what do we do about all of the balkanization? So that fundamentally is a question that we grapple with on so many levels in this country, whether you're talking about healthcare or prisons or schools, and in this case, making energy more ubiquitous towards our national goals on a coast-to-coast basis. That federalism, that tension between federal authority at the center and distributed authorities throughout the states, where most of the regulatory power really lies. And so to just sort of cap that off to lead into our other folks, I'd say that it's important to point out that we have a disparity between what you could call BTU liquidity, the free movement of natural gas, by way of example, from pipelines down in the Port of Houston or Louisiana up into the Northeast, which are regulated by central authority of FERC, and the exact same dilemma, liquidity of electrons, and in the case of what we desire, clean electrons, being impeded and having that authority balkanized and distributed state by state in the way that you described Mike Morris's dilemma for transmission.
Jimmy, what do you do when you've got a project you want to get built and there are 1,000 people who don't want it built scattered around?
Well, I think one of the things that happened in Port Gibson when they first built the nuclear reactor, there were a lot of opposition, but they were convinced. They were sold by the investors, the company Energy, pretty much that it was safe, that it would create 1,000 new jobs, it would enhance the community economically. The sad part about that's not necessarily true. As you indicated before, most of the building of these things are people that live outside of those communities. Port Gibson does not have the kind of talent it takes to build a nuclear reactor. So obviously it does create some very high-level jobs and very good jobs, except that the revenue, and because Port Gibson is a small rural community, many of the people, when they work, they live in Vicksburg and Natchez, which are larger cities with more activities. So you don't get nearly as much out of it as people think you do, or they tell you will get in its inception. But given that Port Gibson's unemployment is still very high, its economic situation is still very bad, they're eager to get this plant in hopes that something will trickle down, that other offshoots, restaurants, service stations, and other kinds of hotels and other things will evolve from those things. But when you're desperate for resources, you reach at every straw.
Tyson?
I actually don't know that I would characterize the situation in America as being paralyzed or not functioning well in terms of siting energy assets. I actually think that the United States does very, very well. I was on a panel last year with a number of executives from energy companies, and they were complaining about the difficulty in getting projects built, and one of them mentioned how easy comparatively it was to build something in China. And I said, sure, China just finished this Three Gorges River Dam project where the government ordered 1.3 million people to abandon their homes, their towns, and move elsewhere because China can do that. They don't have a democracy. They have no system of private property rights. And so you can make unilateral decisions that may be efficient but are extremely wrong. We have in the United States the Fifth Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, which guarantees that you can't seize property without due process, and also no private property shall be taken for public use without just compensation. Those are two incredibly important principles. And NIMBYism, the concept that, not in my backyard, don't build anything in my backyard, there have been abuses. But at its core, it is the embodiment of our democracy. To have local citizens have some input into what gets developed in their neighborhoods, I think is essential to a thriving democracy, especially when the entity seeking to build that is a for-profit, private corporate entity.
I think that's a good point, but we do get into conflicting situations. The state of California right now has a mandate that by 2010, 20% of their energy will come from renewable sources. So there's poor old San Diego Gas and Electric, which owns a chunk of desert, and they're trying to put up solar plants, and they've got a service territory out by the Pacific Ocean, and they're trying to connect the two, and they can't get the line built. Now, I don't know what happens if you don't get your 20%. Maybe they get 6% right now. Maybe they put you in jail. They put the CEO in jail. He's got to share a cell with one of those people who cuts the labels off of mattresses where it says, under pain of federal law. But here's a situation where they're under conflicting government mandates that prevent them from getting something done. Do we need, at this point, We have state goals. We may soon have a national goal. Do we need to rethink land use policy in this country? Is it time?
I'm not sure. I mean, I think that we can get the renewables that we need. I mean, the issue here is that a lot of the projects we've been talking about, you mentioned very high voltage power lines that took 14 years to get permitting. That's to move power from a centralized station that's producing a heck of a lot of energy to disperse it throughout communities. I think that we need to rethink this centralized model and look more towards distributed generation anchored by renewables and huge investments in energy efficiency. I mean, the United States uses double the electricity per person compared to our competitors in Europe and Japan. So the first order business has to be using less energy so you create less.
That's only because the Japanese send all the TVs here, right?
And we watch them all, that's right. So we've got architects in the room. I'd love to hear questions about what is realistic in terms of building standards. We've got an accomplished person who's administrated an entire federal agency on this subject and has a lot to say about it. We've got a lot of standards we can do in terms of energy use by appliances to use less energy, because the less energy we use in our buildings, our appliances, and our transportation is the less need we have for new power systems that need to get permitted.
Let me toss Tyson's point of view out to our other two panelists. Are we going to get carbon-free nuclear on a distributed basis, or carbon-free wind and sun on a distributed basis?
Possibly, but not probably in a time frame that matters or the scale that's consequential relative to getting to 380 parts per million within a decade. So, I mean, that really has got to be, you got to work back from the driver of whatever the outcome is you seek. If the outcome is, let's continue a national conversation with a very slow rate of turnover, ridding ourselves of the technologies and forms of emissions that we don't want in favor of those we do, then scale and time matter. So I don't think we can afford the luxury of ignoring the time value risk management element of the exercise. So yes, you can. I mean, in theory, if this panel was only about the exact same impediments, but not talking about 760 kV national grid corridors for delivering wind or solar at scale, or nuclear, or sequestered coal, whatever you like, and it were only about distributed generation, you wouldn't really have a sufficiently different conversation. In other words, I was the assistant secretary. I couldn't get my homeowners association to waive anything to get a solar panel on my roof. Okay, so how common is that across America, right? I mean, at some point, you've got to say that if the climate could talk, it wouldn't say, gosh, let's pat California on the head, and Vicksburg will catch up, and, Sweden's doing so well, but too bad about China. It would just say, stop choking me, which means you have got to have a larger level of policy coordination that distinguishes what the times require: scope, size, scale, acceleration. And so, to the degree that people are looking at the problem set, whichever problem they seek to mitigate, job creation and economic competitiveness, national security externalities, climate change, emissions in the environment, whichever one you seek to mitigate, the longer you maintain a qualitative discussion about that problem, the further you are from a quantitative analysis of not only the problem, but the solutions to the problem. The solutions require massive quantitative turnover of the capital stock, retiring those things that put out things we don't want or addict us to things we don't want in our energy chain with the new things that we do. So I think that business as usual is not an acceptable scenario if time matters.
And I don't know, I was thinking basically that when you looking at, we've got competition among all of the variable types of energy, which also creates a bit of a problem. I mean, if you're talking to someone that has a vested interest in windmills, they're going to argue against several other alternatives. No one's looking at it from a quantifiable or pure substantive standpoint. More so, they're looking at it more so from a vested interest standpoint. And I think that's some of the things that hinder.
So business as usual is not acceptable. President Lincoln said, public sentiment is everything. With public sentiment, nothing can fail. Without it, nothing can succeed. Has public sentiment changed? The other thing the states have done is Some of them have set up carbon caps. It seems possible that they're striving at incompatible goals or striving at goals without the tools. And maybe Tyson is the one to ask about this, which is, do these times require, let me broach these words, a different form of government, a different form of federal-state relationship, local relationship? Are we going to get so serious about carbon that we start changing the way we do business?
I don't think it calls for radical changes. I think what it means is right now we haven't had a whole lot of leadership on the federal level in terms of we have no national standard for renewable energy mandates. We've got no regulations when it comes to greenhouse gas emissions. So states have been picking up where the federal government has left off. And so as a result, you've got, what is it now, 30, 35 states that have some sort of renewable electricity mandates.
28 in the District of Columbia.
Right, which are orders to local utilities to generate a certain percentage of their energy from renewable resources. And at the same token, states are also recognizing that certain types of new generation, like coal, may not be compatible. You've had about a dozen coal plants rejected by state authorities or pulled back by companies in the last 2 years over concerns about whether or not these coal-fired power plants are compatible with our concerns over climate change and whether or not carbon mitigation techniques such as capturing and storing the carbon are effective. So I think what you're going to see is not a radical reorganization of government, but rather a leadership role on the part of government, because you've got this issue where the American public is concerned about three main things when it comes to energy. One, we need it to be reliable. Two, I don't want it to kill the planet so my children have a place on this planet. And three, I need it to be affordable so I don't have to make decisions about whether I get my utility connection shut off or whether I can buy groceries to feed my kids. And those three issues, I think, are going to be addressed and made a priority in 2009 and 2010. And I think you can merge the issues of climate change, energy affordably, and reliability into a unified policy.
Is that happening? And Jimmy, is that happening? Is that making a difference in nuclear power?
Well, obviously, I think it does. I think it would make a difference there as well. Nuclear power, I mean, it's probably environmentally safer than many of the other alternatives because it doesn't have those emissions. Now, you know, in Illinois, where I am, coal is a big factor, and but the Illinois coal it has a huge amount of sulfur in it. The cost of scrubbers, the assurance of how much you're getting out, and all that other push the costs up substantially to make it not workable. So unless we got some other kind of system to come by and clean up some of these things, I have to agree with Tyson.
Andy, you want to weigh in?
On the question of, sorry?
Do we have a public change in sentiment that's going to change the way we do business?
Inevitably. And so it's not possible in a changing landscape to not have a public change in sentiment. So, and I think most of us would agree that the landscape has never been moving under our feet as fast as it is right now. So the only question is, what does that yield? In theory, that could be stimulus for policies with foresight, execution, implementation, reorganization in such a way that we begin to achieve national goals on a proactive basis. Or we could drift into reactive pain and deal with the consequences of inaction, or in the belief that the business as usual case will somehow resolve things for themselves. Again, I think we are in extraordinary times, and I think it calls for extraordinary actions. And perhaps then you revert back to a business as usual scenario if you have sufficient course correction to get yourself on the trajectories where you have to be relative to energy and the consequences of your energy mix. Right now, we are nowhere near the trajectories where we would need to be to mitigate the problems that are the core prism through which all national concerns emanate. Our economic well-being, our environmental well-being, and our national security. And so we are just drifting along in a very corrosive and unfortunate status quo.
Let me actually go back to something Jimmy said about carbon sequestration. The reference to Illinois coal was that the Energy Department had a program going to run a demonstration in Mattoon, Illinois, that would have captured carbon from a coal plant, injected it underground. this gets complicated. It's complicated to choose a spot for a coal plant now. You need water, you need transmission access, you need rail or barge. If you then add to it, you've also got to have the underground geology. What do we think of our, I won't use the word paralysis, but our difficulties in siting and the technical promise and bureaucratic difficulty of, or maybe financial difficulty of carbon sequestration? And Jimmy, if you want to go first.
Yeah, well, I have to think about that. Go ahead, Tyson.
All right. Well, first, again, I don't know that I would blame bureaucracies or government regulation for any of this. I think that the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act are pretty darn successful at providing extremely high quality of life for American citizens. You talk to the average American, you talk to the average Chinese. The average Chinese is going to be complaining about the types of air quality and filthy polluted water from industrial runoff that Americans haven't had to worry about for 2 generations. So these are, we don't create laws and regulations just to employ bureaucrats. We create laws and regulations to protect people. And I think that if you were building a large industrial facility, there ought to be some hoops to go through. I think that it is incumbent upon you, the entity proposing this industrial project, to prove to the local community, to prove to regulators that your facility is not going to do undue harm to the community.
And how does this play specifically into sequestration?
Well, sequestration, thus far, basically instead of building a smokestack up into the sky, you would put it into a pipeline or stick it into the ground and store the carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gas emissions so they're not going into the atmosphere and acting like a blanket and warming up the earth, but instead being stored in the earth.
I had a question too. Aren't we doing a lot of damage to the planet in itself? And the more stuff we put in the ground and the more stuff we take out of the ground, in Springfield, there was a place in Springfield, they did a lot of strip mining.
Right.
And when they strip mine, they put water under it. If you get a leak or a crack in that, they had a whole house to sink. And I think, half of the area where I lived in Springfield, half of it was strip mine. So, that's the concern I have about putting so much stuff in the ground, because we tend to put a lot of things in the ground. And I don't know if we can encapsulate or protect that stuff such that we have an earthquake, the earthquake scenario. That stuff's going to be everywhere, and then what we're going to do, we're going to have a massive cleanup problem, too.
Right. So I think that there are carbon capture and storage isn't a proven technology yet. It hasn't been proven on a commercial scale. I support research and development into demonstration projects to see if this is something can work. But I think that we need to ensure that any new technology that is seen as a solution to America's climate crisis to allow us to continue to mine and burn coal for our electricity generation and then store the greenhouse gas emissions somehow safely in the earth, we need to make sure that we're not creating a secondary problem that's worse than climate change. And so it's something that we need to study, I think, an awful lot.
This particular one is on everybody's list of one of the things that has to work to get to the total of reducing carbon dioxide emissions by 60%, 80% by the middle of this century. Do we have a regulatory structure in place? Do we have a willingness in place that would allow this to happen?
Well, we're not currently regulating greenhouse gas emissions, so I think that successful implementation of carbon capture and storage could only occur, assuming that technology can work, could only occur with
Maryland is. Maryland is, New Jersey is, New York, Vermont, New Hampshire, and Maine are.
Right.
Whether
Regional...
where are we? Whether the folks over in the big white building over there create a national cap soon is. If I knew that, I'd quit my job and get rich. But
Right, and so I think it has to be dovetailed with a U.S. strategy on climate change, and we haven't had that for years. And I think that with the elevation of Henry Waxman to chairman of the House Energy and Commerce Committee, Senator Jeff Bingaman chairing the Senate Energy Committee, and with the election of Barack Obama as president, I think you've got the executive branch in Congress fairly close to concepts of how to deal with climate change. And it's going to be negotiation with Republicans in the Senate on how exactly that's going to look.
Andy, is this tool going to be in our toolkit, carbon sequestration?
Yes, and there's no point even continuing a discussion about any form of climate change mitigation without it. You cannot dismiss the role of coal, and you cannot limit the discussion to the United States coal industry. And, in 2006, I don't have to tell you, Matt, China put up about a gigawatt per week of new coal capacity. Most of it pulverized, low efficiency, 32% coal. Okay, so that in total, in 2006, was the equivalent of adding the grid of France in generating capacity to the planet. So, and doing it in the dirtiest possible way. The Chinese are not likely, of their own means and resources or philosophy, have demonstrated any willingness to get in front of this problem themselves, having their own federalism issues and economic growth issues at stake. A lot of well-meaning, good leadership over there. I'm not discounting that. But it will mean that the developed countries of the world will have to get in front of the coal mitigation issue with technologies. And it may not exclusively be sequestration, but that is what we have in the batter's box today. We ought to be developing parallel paths and try to create value streams out of carbon waste. The stuff Craig Venter's doing with enzymes and biotech and things that you see on the West Coast, utilization into building materials, et cetera. But inevitably, on the parallel path, dealing with pre- and post-combustion separation of carbon to avoid it entering into the atmosphere is the first, most immediate thing that has to be done. And granted, when you're behind the curve and running at full bore, or should be running at full bore, as is being encouraged by Tyson, you're going to have some collateral damage. You're taking other risk. So we're really in a pick your poison sort of mode right now. But I don't think that there's any way around dealing with coal as a global industry, particularly as a dominant industry in the fastest growing, most intensive emitting economies on Earth. The United States has to exert technology leadership and not just put demonstrations on the table, but commercial and legal frameworks that enable deployment.
But the United States didn't support KOTO, did it? And most of those nations that did sign on haven't reached their targets. I mean, in order to deal with climate change, it's going to have to be a universal kind of issue.
Right.
And if those countries that already signed on, none of them have reached the target, and many of them are saying we don't have any money. So how do you get these things done? Because I agree, you got to have a coal situation for the whole world. You can't just do it in one place and be safe.
Let's actually carry on that theme. We don't have any money. What does this do to our energy and environment picture? Does it make moot the question of whether you're going to get a permit to build something? You're not going to want to build it anyway. What ought we to be doing if we're in an economic pause to get ourselves set up for new economic growth on a sustainable carbon path?
Right. Well, I mean, the Wall Street Journal reported this morning that they were interviewing various utility CEOs who were saying that they were considering pulling back some of their large-scale power plant developments because of unprecedented drops in consumer consumption of electricity. The CEO for Duke was quoted as saying, this is the biggest drop in consumer demand he's seen in 40 years. Now, that's because energy consumption is directly tied to economic output. If an economy is contracting the way ours is, people aren't working, people aren't spending, people aren't traveling, factories aren't running as much, and so energy consumption goes down. We hope that this is not a permanent situation, but what it affords us is an opportunity to implement energy efficiency measures, because again, that is the biggest return on our dollar of investment will be on investments in energy efficiency. And the types of power projects that we're talking about. I mean, I talked at the beginning about rethinking the centralized model and moving more towards a decentralized distributed generation model anchored by renewable energy, investments in energy efficiency with a lot of on-site generation. Now, there's costs to that, but there are enormous costs to building new coal and new nuclear power plants. New nuclear power plants and coal plants that are sequestering the carbon the industry absolutely cannot afford to do that on their own. The capital financing is going to have to be either guaranteed, or the federal government's going to have to chip in enormous financial resources to help build the new generation of nuclear power plants or the new generation of coal-fired power plants. And I just want to be sure that the American taxpayer is getting the best return on their investment.
I was going to ask the other two panelists to respond to that, and they still may, but I want to go into the assumption that distributed renewable energy is a good idea. Mm-hmm. And I think Andy might say that it isn't, or it's not the best idea. And let me ask him to answer that.
No, I wouldn't say that it isn't a good idea. I wouldn't say, but I would say that it is an impossibly romantic notion that we will shift completely from the connectivity of our grid and the fluidity of energy in the economy we know today to something that could be completely supplanted by distributed generation. I'm one of the biggest fans of DG that there is, but I think that policies ought to gear to maximum encouragement and incentivizing it, removing barriers, etc. But technically, that still doesn't get you there. What that does get you is something very desirable: a cleaner grid, a more redundant grid, a more resilient grid, much more security across and reliability. But it does not get you what you presently have. And so I think that when you talk about it, you can't just contrast that with the status quo of coal and nuclear and baseload versus distributed generation. This is a favorite of my dear friend Amory Lovin's. All DG all the time. You get to the scaling question of the other alternatives. How do you make large-scale solar more dispatchable? How do you create wind cost effectively where the resource is? I mean, these are fundamental questions that if you only contrast sort of a best case aspiration against a worst case incumbency, you will leave out enormous opportunity that is immediately available, which is, as you know, with our 20% wind report that we released. We came with numbers, if you call it large federal numbers potentially, of $60 to $70 billion.
It was large before the bank bailout.
Well, that was going to be my point. That was, before it took 6 months to get that report out because of the potential implications of that number and the non-definition of whether it would come from private or public sources, even leaving undefined what the public sources are. But in 72 hours, we put together a 3-page memo requesting $750 billion for a reactive investment in a potential bailout of the consequence and return that we have no idea to. So we're all too prepared to let things happen through complacency and reaction and pain. We need to be a little bit more proactive and say, if we invested in ourselves with next generation transmission technology, that might not be 14-story towers or aesthetic blight, or maybe it's maybe it's 80 billion for buried long-distance DC lines or high-temperature superconductivity underneath bike trails that trail along the interstate. Which is what many of the wildlife activists would like to see with rights-of-ways that already exist. So not unlike what you do in the microcosm environment, the built environment, or at homes, we can design a grid that way for our nation, but only if we are willing to undertake a view towards rational resource utilization, putting the solar farms where it's sunny to optimize that resource at the lowest cost and delivering it to a remote load center, putting the wind where it's windy, and not necessarily saying that every state that wants to have a green badge of courage off the coast of Cape Cod for the sake of it ought to be paying 5 times for the wind resource. Some of this is we can make sense again. And a long time before we had email and BlackBerries, the good news is we already did this in our national history. We already went to far away, remote places in the middle of the desert to harness renewable fluid resources that were emission-free, thousands of miles away from where the electrons were to be delivered in Los Angeles, and built Grand Coulee and Hoover and everything else. And say what we will today about the need for better fish traps, etc., the functional purpose of large hydro is a useful analog as to how our nation can do rational resource utilization for other emission-free, large-scale, available resources that we need to harness. I just view it as stranded energy, wasted energy that we're letting float over our plains while we have this debate, in paralysis, I would say, over where whether we're going to be exclusively about coal or exclusively about letting my homeowners association give me a panel.
Jimmy, you're in a town that's counting on the continuation of a centralized grid, right?
Yes, yes. Given our socioeconomic situation, we
Wait
don't
till
have...
Andy tries to put a reactor in his basement.
Well, but we don't really have... unless we can come with we can't do wind. Too many trees, too many weeds.
Right.
No, we can't really do wind. But no. And like I said, I support nuclear energy because it is greener, cleaner, whatever. But also, I want to see Port Gibson recover from its economic blight. And there's not a whole lot of people chasing and going to Port Gibson trying to bring anything in. You mentioned the 40 jobs in the furniture store, and that never happened yet.
Okay.
So that's a scenario.
That's only 3 years ago.
Yeah, so I'm saying it hasn't happened. So we have to have something. It's really kind of tough, though, because we're asking government to intercede again when we say we want a shrinking government, which seemed to be counterproductive. It's almost like when we started with the mercantilists and Adam Smith. The first thing they said, we want a laissez-faire. We want a free hand. The second thing they did, they asked for tariffs against England. So, you can't have it both ways. And that's what we tend to be asking for. And I think that's what makes it so problematic. I would not seek the nuclear plant if we had another choice. If there was some other entity there that we could bring in and generate the kind of economic growth and the stability. When you have places like that, they lose all of their talented resources. 90% of the people, when they graduate from college, go to school, college, they don't relocate there. They go somewhere else. So now you educating them, preparing them to stabilize the future of the economy in which they were born and raised in, but they're not going to stay there because that can't accommodate them economically.
I think we're going to turn to the audience. I hope we've raised somebody's blood pressure here. And you can pose a question to a specific panelist or to the panel as a whole. Please.
The DG approach would seem to be compatible with local or state guidance, whereas the enhanced grid, enhanced power plants approach would seem to require really federal control, federal government overruling the states. Is that a correct view of the possible dichotomy?
I'll turn that over to the panelists, but I've heard the solar guys say it sure would be nice if the connection standards for a rooftop panel were the same in New Jersey and Pennsylvania so I could do business on both sides of the river.
I think there's a distinction between, sort of having an IEEE or the feds, create standards versus a state-guided approach, let's say, or a local-guided approach to, rooftop solar versus if you need the federal government to basically overrule the states, bypass the state PUCs and say, we're going to build this new grid. We're going to enhance the grid in this way. We're going to emphasize these corridors, and we're going to build these kind of power plants. So I'm saying there would appear to be a dichotomy between the two approaches. I'm just curious how you all feel about that.
So Tyson, is that why you hold out the Fifth Amendment, no seizure of public property for private use or taking without compensation, build the rooftop system instead?
Well, I think that the U.S. Constitution is a pretty cool document. I like the Fifth Amendment along with all the other amendments. And no, for me, as a consumer group, we are interested in promoting energy sources that are clean and that hopefully that households can have a say over. And so we've been active in California trying to expand the low-income provisions of their solar mandate. The state is budgeting almost $4 billion in grants to promote solar energy, to provide subsidies. And we want to make sure that those are provided to not just wealthy folks in Beverly Hills who have a cocktail party and get to show off the new solar panels on their roof, but to people who actually will make a huge difference in their monthly income. Now, getting to your point, we absolutely would like to have some federal involvement in helping to standardize and incentivize moves towards promoting renewables and allowing them to be connected to the grid in efficient ways. I'm sure you could talk a little more about details of how that would happen. I don't know if you can from your prior role in the Department of Energy. But right now, having it be always a state-led effort isn't the most efficient way to go. It would be nice to get some federal mandates and federal standards out there, because I think that right now you've got a relatively small number of utilities that have a very loud voice in Washington, D.C. They've pooled their resources, and they're getting heard by Congress, and I think that there's, not to say that the wind lobby or the solar lobby is a bunch of pipsqueaks, but they are definitely not as loud as some of the traditional utilities. And so if you've got something to add, that'd be great.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. The utilities are boxed into their model. I mean, the other, not a distant cousin to the policies that might enable distributed generation to scale, net metering principally, earning revenue for the exercise, along with removing barriers. I mean, there's a lot of places where net metering exists, but yet the utility still has a barrier like a standing charge, so that makes it not worth your while, even if you do get revenue. So removal of barriers and an incentive, that's sort of your principal methodology of bringing on DG. So then the question is, if you've got 53 jurisdictions, including the territories, all moving at different paces at a different rate with a different patchwork, what makes that desirable, other than old line Article 10 federalism, which is, I'm not going to argue with it. It is a constitutional issue. The states reserve X powers, blah, blah, blah. We have this discussion with school books and lots of things. But it goes back to the time, value, urgency of the exercise. There is no point talking about 380 parts per million, or melt across the Northwest Passage, or national security alleviation. I forgot what the President-elect's goal is, but something within a decade on, and Gore's is complete removable of fossil fuels within a decade. And there's no point discussing those things if you're not ready to tackle federalism. And as a first step, if we cannot as a nation get the states moving, rowing towards a common direction at a common pace for a common goal, then there's no point just saying, well, may the best state win. So, and hopefully we'll get lucky. And so I say that because I used to have a program called the State Energy Program, which was responsible for cajoling the states. Now, NHTSA has a comparable program. The states have the right and preserve the right for the drinking age, okay? But there's enough money in the coffers that when we say we want to change the drinking age in this country, in 24 hours we can do it, because no state wants to opt out. Okay, the Department of Energy, $50 million spread over 53 jurisdictions, disproportionately formulaically, is not enough carrot to get net metering in a uniform methodology. So you need the federal government to either decide we're going to offer a heck of a lot more carrot for speed limit, drinking age type inducements, or we're going to have to codify this at a federal level.
Let me try to steer the conversation back towards what I think the question was, which is, are we going to pick distributed generation for renewables because our legal setup is not present in a way that would allow centralized renewable generation? Is that what's happening?
Was that the question? Yeah.
I love misquoting people in front of them.
Okay.
Well, I'm not sure that there's big impediments to centralize renewable production either. I mean,
there is if you can't get the transmission built.
Yeah.
As a renewable developer, I can affirm to you there are.
But for transmission, absolutely. And with concentrated solar out in the desert, there's huge potential efficiency there, but it uses a lot of water, and the desert isn't a place where there's a lot of water, because it's my understanding that it's basically you're concentrating the solar heat onto water
to
create
it can
steam.
require a lot of water.
Right. And there's other incidental issues. But the distributed generation model can be expensive, but I think weighed in when you take the full capital costs and lifetime costs of coal, of a new generation of coal and nukes, with nuclear power, with highly radioactive waste that sticks around for hundreds of thousands of years, and with coal, you've got to sequester the carbon for an infinite amount of time, and there are costs associated with that. I think that renewables, especially with the per unit cost decreasing if you increase production, could get more and more attractive.
Do we have any other questions? Please.
I haven't heard anyone mention the word eminent domain. And I was thinking back, I think you mentioned some of the big hydro projects in the far west. I was thinking about TVA, the Tennessee Valley Authority, which I think was put together in very speedy order during the Depression, when there was an incentive to get things moving. I wonder if some of those routes can't be followed. I think under eminent domain, you have the right to go ahead, and they can sit and argue about the costs and prices for a long, long time, but without delaying the project to get that answer.
Yeah, that's right. And people have also mentioned to me, the interstate highway system as another example of that. The issue is a couple of things. One, the entities that you were talking about, TVA, and then the interstate highway system, those were federal government entities. And it's one thing for the government to come in and say, okay, we're going to seize this land. It's another thing for the government to come in and seize the land and turn it over to a for-profit entity. And also, during the Depression and during the development of the interstate highway system, the population density of the United States was far different. I mean, in 1950, there were 42.6 people per square mile in the United States. According to the 2000 census, that had increased 87% to 79.6 people. And so it was a lot easier to declare, to seize land, a generation or two ago, because there was a lot less people that you had to deal with. Our population is now over 300 million, and we've got a lot more people in places where there didn't used to be anybody. And so it is more difficult. And so population density plays a role. But the federal government has made recent changes extending its power of eminent domain, specifically the 2005 Energy Policy Act, which for the first time in American history gave the federal government the ultimate authority of eminent domain over high voltage transmission lines for electricity. That overturned, a century of state-based jurisdiction over that. So that was an example just a couple years ago of the federal government coming in.
Is this a good idea or a bad idea?
We raised serious questions about it, and there was a second provision that did a similar thing with liquefied natural gas facilities.
And there was something else on ordinary natural gas, but that dates to 1946, 47?
Right, with Federal Energy Regulatory Commission jurisdiction over pipelines. Yeah, they've had the federal government has had eminent domain jurisdiction over pipelines for a long time.
Would you like to see that repealed? I guess that's the question. Since they already have that authority for pipes, but not wires, and you're sensitive to the wires question, would you like to see the pipeline authority repealed? That's also 100 years in the making, just like the other one didn't exist for 100 years?
Not necessarily. I think I would like to see the agency that has the jurisdiction over this, that the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, at least have an office within it of state affairs. I would like to see that the commission as it's currently structured is not extremely responsive to state concerns. And I would like to see, I don't know how you could structure it, but I have no problem with the concept of the federal government having eminent domain authority. I just want to be sure that that the decision makers are ultimately accountable to folks on those kinds of decisions.
Andy, you worked down the hall from the guys who actually had that authority. Do you think the 2005 Act was necessary, sufficient?
I think it was insufficient because I think ultimately it needs to, one's right and one's wrong. We currently do this for gas pipelines, so I don't know why gas transmission across the country from Texas to Boston is more righteous than wind electrons from North Dakota to Milwaukee. I can't figure that one out. Okay, so this is a hardware permitting access question. So, if you're on the side of, well, the gas thing is wrong, well, I can understand why you'd say the wires thing is wrong. But it can't be that they're both right, And what I think is clearly wrong is anything that we are doing to impede massive build-out of domestic, secure, clean electrons with immediacy. Okay, so you can't say, well, the solar and wind industries will prosper even if they don't have a market to sell into. The marketplace for commerce, interstate commerce, of clean electron liquidity in this country is a national grid. And we are very much in a pre-World War II highway state of affairs. If you all have been down US 1 or some of the old rickety state highways that used to balkanize and connect the country and make a transcontinental trip a 4-week exercise, even by road, you would understand and appreciate the Eisenhower move for national security justifications to say a country such as ours needs greater connectivity, fluidity, liquidity. That is where we are with electrons. If we are going to domesticate our energy supply for security, it is going to be through power generation, and the power generation needs to be clean. You know, and so you can't begin to grow the market of green-collar jobs and manufacturing of turbines and blades and panels and balance of plant and storage and all the rest of it until you shape the marketplace that would allow it to exist. And the authorities that were given in EPAC 2005 are a start, but it's the equivalent of giving the federal government a bayonet and saying, jump in the trench and good luck. You know, that's not how the interstate highway system would have gotten built. President-elect Obama voted for those provisions, and from what I hear in his speaking, he is very interested in a infrastructure, clean energy infrastructure build-out. I think that ultimately leads you to conclude that the federal government is going to find more rational ways of authority, albeit I agree with you that it has to be with sufficient sensitivity of engaging stakeholders.
We have sitting between our antagonists a gentleman who spent local government. And should the federal government have a bigger role in where power lines go?
I think in areas like that, I do think that they should. I mean, I agree. If you're going to say that the gas pipeline should be a national situation, why wouldn't the wire? Because what you're going to have is similar to what the gentleman asked. If he could do something in Pennsylvania but not in New Jersey, you know, where are you going to get this commonality? Because the costs will be significantly more through the distributive process than it would be in the centralized process. States have issues too because the federal government is so slow to respond to situations and forces the states to do what the federal government does, which is crisis management sort of thing. They let things get in a real bad shape and then they say, we're going to fix it. Well, what happens is that if we develop a plan, a long-term plan, and follow it, making adjustments, tweaking where technology and stuff changes, but if we were to draw that out, I think that I think more states would support it. No governor wants to give up his authority. Every chief executive wants to be Superman. So, I mean, you know, they're not going to voluntarily give it up, but the difference is that you have to look at the good of the whole, you have to look at the costs, you have to look at all those things. And I also agree that a lot of the whole energy issues, period, are regional, geographical, as you indicated, but at the same time, I know you can't put solar panels in the desert, although that's an ideal spot because of the sun, except that without the water, it's not going to work. So I do think that the federal government should play a major role in those types of services.
Do we have another question? Please.
I just wondered if people like Boone Pickens and Al Gore are helping us get closer to an overall plan because they have the public ear, or are they just confusing the situation or stirring it up and not getting us anywhere?
If I weren't the moderator, I'd say I'd vote for confusion, but I am the moderator, so I won't say that.
They're spending an awful lot of money, and what they're getting for their money is a huge increase in public awareness about the issue. And so in that sense, I think that they are providing an excellent public service. The details of some of their plans, with Gore, he's vague on some things. I think overall his goal is an admirable one. I'd love to see a lot more detail. With Pickens, I agree with 50% of what he's saying and disagree with the other half. The half that I'm in agreement with Mr. Pickens on is that I think that wind can displace the 20% of electricity generation that we currently get from natural gas. The Department of Energy put out it wasn't a goal, I understand that. It was just a scenario of, what would it take for the United States to reach 20% of our electricity produced by wind by 2030. The issue where I disagree with Mr. Pickens is converting all of our transportation into compressed natural gas. To me, that makes no sense whatsoever. I think that compressed natural gas makes a lot of sense if you're operating fleets. For example, here in Washington, D.C., many of the metro buses, say, running on clean natural gas. The very efficient parking meter people who give tickets proficiently drive around in little cars that run on compressed natural gas, because that makes sense. At the end of their shifts, those vehicles all go to a centralized garage and a centralized fueling facility. For the 150, 160 million cars and trucks that are on the American road that are driving this way and that, to lay down an infrastructure network to service the 8,000 or 9,000 gas stations with compressed natural gas, I don't think that makes as much sense. I think that for vehicles, what makes a heck of a lot of sense is integrating our transportation with the electric grid. That creates some issues in terms of electricity demand, obviously, but it's a technology that's already there in terms of plug-in hybrids. I mean, heck, you've got people converting a Toyota Prius in their garage into a hybrid, and they're getting 100 miles to the gallon, and it costs them $2,000 to do it. So,
Last quote I heard was 10,000, but that's all right.
Right, but my feeling is Al Gore and T. Boone Pickens are doing a good public service in terms of stirring up the debate, which in a democracy is a darn good thing.
I agree. I've seen, it's frightening when you watch Al Gore's film. These two gentlemen here are, energy czars. But for a guy like me, I'm like you guys to a large extent. When I saw Al Gore thing, I started thinking, when I see New York flooding, San Francisco falling in the water, I was thinking I was watching Superman with Lex Luthor. But T. Boone Pickens is putting his own money into it too, which is also a good thing. And I think what happens, and what you're saying basically, is we all need to be better educated so we can make more informed decisions about it. Because it can be thoroughly confusing, as I said earlier, depending on the vested interest of the person that's putting on the presentation.
Andy, what do you think?
Well, I agree with the main notion, which is the primary good from it is public awareness and social conscientiousness of the issues. On the substance, you say more details from the Gore thing. I've never seen any details. So I mean, there's an aspirational, rhetorical thing there, which all political leaders are given to, I'm exhausted in rhetorical, aspirational stuff. I very much go to my earlier comment on quantitative problem, quantitative solutions. Let's see the map. The whole idea of eliminating the entire carbon-based fossil fuel economy within a decade it's unfortunately not a credible assertion. Although I love it. I love that. I love ambition. The fire in one's belly to fuel that kind of ambition. But it's not a credible assertion when you have 14 years to get to a line that might enable wind power to scale. So you have got to get back to reality, because there is no wand here. This is a diverse and complex problem, and we don't do our children any kind of service by A, frightening them to death, and then B, saying, but it'll all go away with pixie dust. And there is no pixie dust here. This is a multi-generational dig in, beat smoking, eliminate forest fires, get rid of pollution, big multi-generational thing, bigger than all those three things combined, I would say, from an education awareness point of view. But it's going to take substantive execution on policy, mandates, incentives, the kind of things we've been talking about.
Andy, if you had the 20% wind, enough to replace natural gas, would you use it to replace natural gas, or would you use it to replace coal?
Well, first of all, the assertion wasn't that's Pickens' assertion that wind could replace the natural gas. The wind report does not say that. In fact, you need natural gas as load. Again, back to the pixie dust element to it. You need natural gas as load balancing for the wind, as you know, or for any intermittent resource. Having said that, as a person who spent 20 years in power development, my own feeling is that burning natural gas in a turbine is like washing your dishes with NSEXO. It just doesn't make sense. It has a higher and better use in the energy economy most of the time. And that higher and better use would be maintaining some modicum of domestic jobs through manufacturing and industry and key components that we have here at home that have a higher and better use. Now, we're allegedly opening up new seams of natural gas. That's why Boone is encouraged. to go with the whole it's enough for all vehicles, although I think he's backed off that slightly. But it is certain that in the fleets, as you in school buses, where school districts, Montgomery County is cutting back on school books, so and having kids walk, or not attend, it is certain that we ought to have a mandate towards natural gas and some regularity on a fleet level. So it's always about diversity and the highest and best use of available sources. I think coal, certainly I think you'll see a long dry stretch. We've already seen a very big dry stretch on coal. It'll get drier in the current environment. And so I think it begins to naturally atrophy and have retirements unless it can address its emissions problem and profile. I'm not sure that baseload coal is a direct competitor with large-scale intermittent sources. I really think that becomes the question with nuclear at the baseload level.
We have another question? Please.
Hi. I haven't heard any discussion tonight about geothermal and particularly also other sources that might be undertaken at a consumer or a household level of taking some of the initiative to transition to renewables at that level. For instance, I know geothermal houses can be retrofitted, and that would reduce, whatever your heating and cooling source is, as well as other types of conservation activities versus these national or macro types of energy sources.
There was a story in the New York Times last week that said an institution downtown wanted to do geothermal. And speaking of not in my backyard in Manhattan, where of course there are no backyards, the city of New York said, not near my water tunnel you don't. But I wonder if our panel would like to react.
Well, I've been a particularly strong proponent of geothermal. We had, as with many things in the course of this administration, evolutions and course corrections. And one of the more notable from a programmatic point of view was that we resurrected the National Geothermal Program, which had been zeroed out, and we did that on the back of again taking a large national view towards what the resource could do. And even though I talk about these large things, I don't want to confuse that one competes against the other, the distributed side against the scaled side. I think you need them both. You need to seek the outcomes and the characteristic of it. Clean, secure, domestic, emission-free, rather than necessarily the application, which really policy should cultivate the conditions of. So in the case of geothermal, where we combed out a national aspiration and said we should aim for not less than 100 gigawatts of capacity nationwide by mid-century, that was the first time we sort of took a grander view. A large portion of that, although I might argue against along the lines of what you're suggesting, an insufficient portion was for geothermal heat pumps at the home level. Now, if you look at a place like Sweden, this is 80-90% of residential construction. In the United States, it's optional. We have a very minor market for it. Nothing could make more sense. It is a pure life cycle play. And rather than view it as energy source, you really would view it as demand-side management. But, to my mind, this is a building codes question, which is why we advocated elevating the National Model Building Code by 30%. In 30 years, the Department of Energy National Model Building Codes never moved 2 to 3% over a 3 to 5 year period. We advocated a single year 30% jump in elevation. That should, if it is accepted, and about 22% of it has been, should begin to induce a geothermal heat pump market. But I would say beyond that, we should be designing incentives and having the architecture community, the design community, everybody else into that. There is absolutely no reason in the world that it shouldn't be almost ubiquitous nationwide. Everywhere in the country would benefit on a life cycle basis from geothermal heat pumps. I think that's what you're talking about when you talk about distributed.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
Do we have another question?
My question is in two parts. Mr. Karsner, you talked about these dedicated lines that would be underground. Are those, in fact, are they, I'm sorry, I lost the word. What I want to know is if there are more effective means of transporting. Are they better.
More efficient.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. So the two that I referred to, long-distance DC corridors as opposed to AC high-voltage transmission, and high-temperature superconducting, which is a little further out, not in the marketplace now, but in trials in various parts of the country, are both much more highly efficient. That's their benefit. The challenge is bringing them down the cost curve. And all these things, we do have in this country a degree of technological sufficiency and maturity. Sometimes it's distorted. In fact, all the time in the United States, when we talk about renewable energy or efficiency technologies, we usually talk about it on an uninformed basis. You know, but this is no different. People, because you'll hear a utility guy go, too futuristic. You know, too won't, not here yet. You know, grab a real simple thing. You know, that's why this won't work. But it's always the same question. The technology usually will work. It is usually superior. It is usually more efficient and more intelligent. But being a new technology at a new capital cost and not in mass production, it is almost always at a higher place for capital cost. So you all would know from your building works, you know, what that means. That's the difference between saying, no, let's have a grid that's builder's grade by definition, or let's build something to a superior standard. So the question here is, where would these things go down the cost curve if we had manufacturing domestically of thousands of miles of high-temperature superconducting? We certainly know it would be a superior technological thing, but not unlike the net present value of any building material, compact fluorescence, insulation, the building envelope, anything you think about today, it's a life cycle question. How long will these be around, and what is the worthwhile front cost for the taxpayer?
Is this an analog of our overall theme, which is what makes sense collectively may not make sense individually? It would make sense collectively if we had pathfinders order more of this stuff till it came down the curve, but it makes no sense for the individual to do it?
I think that's right. I think that's fundamentally what we're talking about, is can you gear your marketplace to serve the aggregate good on a collective basis where it otherwise would reach a market imperfection on an individual basis. Very hard today for a guy in the geothermally hot United States, even in the East Coast, to even find a contractor to put in a reasonable geothermal heat pump. Okay, if you got a building code that establishes a market for them, everybody's going to get that at a lower cost, is going to have lower operating bills, we're going to have lower emissions, we're going to be more competitive as a country, we're going to be more secure, consuming less power. And so, you know, the question is, you know, do we continue to do this with every man for himself, or do we devise policies that get to that aggregate good?
So could I return to our original theme, mostly about power lines? Is our inability to build power lines, does this amount to a market imperfection, where you end up with high costs for power in some places and low cost in others because you can't move the stuff, where you end up building your wind machine in a place with mediocre wind because it has good grid access instead of better wind where it has no grid access? Is this a market imperfection? Does our regulatory system for getting things built amount to a market imperfection?
Well, I don't think we have any perfect markets. You just have to take a look what's going on Wall Street to come to that conclusion. I think that, and different energy costs vary by region, you know, depending upon past investment decisions by utilities. Some of them bet big on nukes in the 70s, and they experienced tens of billions of dollars in cost overruns, and in some cases are still paying off those debts. And then other places are blessed with lots of access to super cheap energy, like in the Pacific Northwest with hydro, or in the South, which has higher reliance on
but at the
pulverized
moment,
coal.
we have cheap generators sitting idle and expensive generators running because there's no lines to connect the cheap generators to the expensive load.
Right.
And you could call that a market imperfection, but isn't it a governmental imperfection, a societal imperfection? Not that I'm suggesting we have perfect societies.
Well, I mean, it's underperformance of our resource consumption. I mean, is ultimately what you're doing is saying, you know, what degree do we find inefficiency, waste, underperformance to be tolerable in a nation where resources are precious, are impactful, and are fundamentally affecting our security and economic health. So yeah, I would say any margin, particularly one that glares at you in the face and says, you know, we have the best available solar resources in the world, or wind resources, or geothermal resources, but we can't deliver them, or we can under-deliver them, or we can overprice them and then say they're not cost competitive because we fail to deal with their intrinsic characteristics. All of that is clearly, whether you call it a market imperfection or underperformance of our national potential and aspirations, it's something that demands corrective action.
But you're seeing investment, you're seeing more and more investment go into transmission. I mean, there's a investor, some of you may have heard of him, called Warren Buffett, who has very quietly amassed quite an empire of utilities. He's in the process of trying to acquire Baltimore-based Constellation Energy to add to Mid-American and Pacificor. And I think that he anticipates there are two aspects in the Energy Policy Act of 2005. One was giving the federal government the power of eminent domain and veto authority over states that drag their feet. But the second was transmission rate reform, which provided huge financial incentives for private industry to build and expand transmission lines. And Warren Buffett has noted that that's going to be the priority of his utility business, is modeled on being the largest mover of electrons in the country. And so I think that recent regulatory changes are going to be driving investment. And with the power of the federal government to seize land and to veto states, the ability of local landowners to successfully stop projects may be limited.
This is prediction, not description of what we actually have now.
This is prediction, but I mean, the 2005 Energy Policy Act was just enacted. I think it's going to take, take a while for it to take effect.
Which takes you back to Al Gore. Because if we're 2005 Energy Policy Act, and it's 2008, none of that has come true. Not a single provision has been implemented. And it's going to take a while. So we're already a third of the way through our 10-year elimination of fossil fuels. Which brings us back to what do we need to do with precision, poignantly, to be impactful to scale solutions in a manner that is consequential in a time frame that is relevant to climate change, to national security, et cetera.
So, Andy,
and this town, unfortunately, operates at the pace of saying, let's have another initiative. Let's pass another act. That one will only take 5 to 7 years to implement as a correction to the last one.
So, Andy, you could create a new term here. You've heard of dog years. You could do energy years.
Washington years.
Washington
yeah.
years. Do we have another question?
Well, the second half of my question was based on the fact that these new lines, the potential for these new lines would be so much more efficient for carrying the energy to our urban centers. Is there any potential whatsoever for sort of a hybrid system? Can these plug into what is already in place, or is it in fact as different as analog and digital technology was for telephone lines? No,
it would be a hybrid system, and just to give you a very sort of cheap layman's description of it, DC lines fundamentally need step-ups and step-downs, transformers at both ends that are highly expensive. Okay, so the longer that line is, the more cost-effective that system is. The more miles you have between these two step-ups and step-downs. Because when we plug things into our house, it's an AC. Edison versus Tesla, Tesla loss, we do it in AC. Now, ironically, when we generate renewables at scale, we start in DC. Okay, and then we convert it to AC, so that ultimately we might convert it back to DC one day so that we can step it down to AC at your house and probably have 2 or 3 conversions at the house level before it gets to you. So we have enormous inefficiencies built into the system from that alone. But the truth is, just like the interstate highway system overlays US 1 and state highway this and farm road that and all these legacy systems, it would interact and ultimately be a part of the greater system.
We're going to take one more question, and then we're going to hit the panelists with what idea they would most like the audience to take home from this. So do we have another question from the audience? Please.
To what extent is the NIMBY problem simply and literally caused by visibility, particularly in relation to transmission lines. That is, if utilities are more creative as far as where they put these lines and more creative in the designs of the towers, maybe even the colors of the towers and the lines, so as to make them just simply less visible, to what extent does that reduce the NIMBY issue?
I'll take the moderator's prerogative here and interject that this line that took 14 years to site that American Electric Power built between West Virginia and Virginia, they anodized the towers. They changed their color to make them less visible, and they routed it behind a mountain because it was crossing a scenic river, and it still took them 14 years, but your point may yet be correct.
Yeah, I think that property owners that don't want what they consider to be an eyesore is a major issue. We get lots of letters and phone calls and emails from folks who raise issues about electromagnetic fields and safety concerns about those. But the primary thing, and even for other issues dealing with some proposed wind projects, have been just people don't want to see it. Not to knock legitimate NIMBY concerns over, industrial pollution issues like coal-fired power plants or nuclear power plants that will store on-site radioactive waste. But, I think that more public education needs to happen, and I think that the 2005 Energy Policy Act will probably eventually nullify a lot of NIMBYism that is based solely on aesthetics instead of harm to the environment or canceling a project because it's not real viable.
Jimmy, you have some neighbors who don't like the idea of another reactor there, but they won't actually be able to see it.
Right. Well, that's true. There are a lot of them. On a personal basis, I wouldn't want it next to my door, But the truth of the matter is that their position is squashed politically by virtue of the gross need for economic growth and so forth. And also, it's very political. I mean, the outcomes of a lot of these things are so political because they're in legislative houses, the lobbyists, and everything else. And it's so hard for people to really know what's true and what's not true. It depends on who you're talking to. That's one of the reasons I think, and you said you're going to have us tell what we'd like to see them take away. I'd like to see them take away the thought that we need to educate ourselves more in this whole field. I mean, we are in a crisis situation with our energy situation now. And unless we know who's telling us the truth and what it's going to cost us, I said earlier when they, after they built the first reactor at Port Gibson, or in Grand Gulf really, but Port Gibson, they had agreed about 10 years later to build a second one. The energy said they didn't have any money to do this, so they raised everyone's rate up to about 60%. After 2 years, they didn't build it, and they said, well, we changed our plans, we're going to go somewhere else. The people were never given their monies back that they had paid for this. So I think that we just really need to understand this whole field a lot better and get some honest answers.
Andy?
No, to the question, viewshed is always sort of the immediate primary quick response on any kind of NIMBY objection. There's a host of others, but ultimately it's, and there's lots going on to mitigate those things, and I think some of the newer technologies in terms of their footprint can help mitigate it. But ultimately, you are always going to have some degree of objection relative to large-scale infrastructure in the proximity of people with real estate value. I mean, there's just simply no way around that. And so it's going to get down to this question of, are we a country of everyone for themselves, or can we build out a national and global strategy?
We may get beyond the viewshed problem when we get to sequestration of carbon dioxide. Then it won't be not in my backyard, it'll be not under my backyard. So let me ask the panelists, starting with Tyson, what message you'd like to give the audience to take home?
Well, working here in Washington, D.C., one thing that I'm definitely always struck by is the role of lobbyists that are representing special interests. And there's been talk about why the United States hasn't pursued certain strategies. And some of it is that Congress is inundated with messages that are coming from interests that are pursuing what makes sense to their individual shareholders or to their a quarterly profit, but really has no basis for national energy policy. And the problem is when lobbyists get to set the tone of the debate and set the course for policies. And I would just urge folks to take a look at who messengers are on certain issues, whether it's coming from Public Citizen or some other group, and look at what the, kind of getting what you were talking about. What are the interests of entities that are pursuing different agendas? T. Boone Pickens talks about a lot of stuff, but he's also invested an enormous amount of money in this stuff, which is why I warned environmental groups not to link arms with him, because it's one thing if you're an environmental group or a consumer group with no personal financial stake in the outcome, and your organization has no financial stake in the outcome. It's another when you're an entity that does have a financial stake. And I'm not saying that these entities don't have a right to lobby, but that we have to be careful in the types of policies that get implemented, that they're in response to what is best from the national interest and not just accommodating the needs of narrow special interests. And I don't see a very strong lobby out there for distributed generation. I see a very big lobby by a relatively small group of very powerful entities that want to build coal and nuclear power plants. They don't have the money to build them themselves because they're prohibitively expensive, and so they're asking for large subsidies. Well, I know a lot of families out there that would love to install solar panels or pursue geothermal or make energy efficient improvements or buy that hybrid vehicle, but they can't afford it. But they can't get on the phone and talk to Joe the lobbyist who charges $500 an hour and say, hey Joe, what meetings did you set up with Congress people today on my behalf? That doesn't happen. And so that's my point.
And in view of that, how rigid do you think that, since none of the 2005 Energy Act has been implemented at all, with a new Congress, a new leadership, a new direction, is that probably not dead? I mean, it will come back in a different form.
The lobbyists are going to be there. I mean, the Democrats are firmly in support of coal. I think the only thing that's going to be missing is the oil industry does not have as many friends in the Democratic Party as they do in the Republican Party. But a lot of these other energy interests, they're bipartisan in nature. And I'm not saying that it's inherently bad. I'm just saying that it's important, from my perspective, it's important to be able to sort that out.
Well, I'm glad that, now with Democratic majorities in the White House together, that there probably will be no more lobbying in Washington. And I think that we can all rest assured that the solutions are immediately before us. But the question was, what would I leave with as a message? Well, on that note, I always leave with, in my speaking appearances, that we should be working for the success of this administration, because America has never needed success more than it does now on this particular question. And that is the leave behind, which is we are more vulnerable than at any time in our national history. We are more environmentally at risk. We are facing an enormous collapse in wealth, competitiveness, economic standard of living, quality of life that we hand to our children. It all goes through this question. So the one word is urgency, time value of management. There really is no time for business as usual, and talk is cheap. So I am hopeful that the new president will be able to exert leadership over the new Congress, because he has worked very strongly bipartisan. I've had the experience of testifying before him and working with his office, and has a broad grasp of the need for diversification and outcomes-based energy at scale. So I'm hopeful that we will see execution and implementation and competence in meeting some of these aspirations, eclipsing rhetoric.
Very good. I'd like to thank our panelists. I'd like to thank the National Building Museum, the Greener Good series, and we'll be around for a few minutes if you'd like to chat. Thank you.